Good morning, friends. This is Dr. Narendra Jadhav. At the very outset, let me apologize for taking a big gap between the last video blog and the present one. Let me explain. In the interregnum, I was not feeling too well, and I had to go through a couple of surgeries and I had to go through hospitalization. That is why I could not communicate with you earlier, but now I am on a way to recovery, and I've lost a lot of weight, but I'll gain that in a couple of months, and I'm on way to recovery. The worst is over, so I am back in action. So we are going to start this series of vlogging, and the subject that we have chosen today is very, very important. What we are going to talk about today is recent banking scams, and in that context, we are going to discuss the conflicting views, the conflict between the Reserve Bank of India and the Ministry of Finance. And there are many questions which will come up in this, including whether bank nationalization was the wrong move, whether we need to go back to privatization of banks again, so on. How did the Nirav Modi crisis happen? The crisis escaped the attention of the regulator, that is the Reserve Bank of India. What was the modus operandi of Nirav Modi and the company? You know, all these issues are going to be discussed today, and I expect some questions from you. But before I expect questions from you, I would like to give you a background of this subject. And then against that backdrop, you can ask whatever questions that you have, and I will try to answer them to the best of my ability. First of all, let us understand the subject. Nirav Modi crisis, the scam, which is presently put at something like 12,000 crore plus, and the numbers are rising. Some people say it may go up to 20,000 crore. This happens to be the largest scam in the banking industry that has taken place historically. And what has happened after the scam is that in the last few days, conflicting views have been emerging between RBI and the government of India, particularly the Ministry of Finance. The Honorable Minister of Finance, my colleague in the Parliament, Arun Jaitley, he immediately blamed the supervision system, namely the Reserve Bank of India, saying that Reserve Bank should have noticed this and should have stopped that in time. And then they went on making political statements that this was going on from the previous government. We are not concerned about that government or this government. But what we are concerned is the modus operandi of this scam. And what the government is saying is that they have squarely blamed it on the Reserve Bank of India. On the other hand, the governor of Reserve Bank of India and my colleague and friend, Dr. Urjit Patel, has come out with a strong statement saying that as far as the public sector banks are concerned, Reserve Bank of India does not have enough powers. Many powers that Reserve Bank had earlier have been taken away by political parties, in the sense the government of the day. As a result, RBI does not have sufficient powers to control and detect the crisis that has taken place, the scam that has taken place. So this is obviously a conflicting view between the Ministry of Finance and the government and the Reserve Bank of India. In response to Dr. Urjit Patel's statement, Arvind Subramaniam came up with the statement that autonomy or independence of central bank is to be achieved by actions. He's absolutely right, but he's evading the main question. So let us first try to understand the relationship between the Ministry of Finance on one hand and the Reserve Bank of India on the other. Then we will go on to Nirav Modi's scam. Generally speaking, you know, in any democratic country, there is always a conflict between the central bank of the country, like Reserve Bank of India in our case, and the Ministry of Finance. Why is there this conflict? Because they have different dharma. The dharma of the government is to make sure that the economic growth is as fast as possible. So typically, the government would insist on lowering the interest rate so as to spur, so as to give a push to economic growth process. This is their dharma, and they will go on emphasizing the need to have faster growth. On the other hand, the dharma of the central bank of the country, like Reserve Bank of India, is to maintain inflation at its minimum or at the optimal level. In India, our target is 4% inflation with plus or minus 2% on either side, a band that has been agreed. So the dharma of the Reserve Bank of India is to maintain inflation in this targeted interval and not let inflation go very high, because inflation is nothing but an iniquitous form of taxation which hits the poor the most. And that is why containing inflation is the main dharma of the central bank like Reserve Bank of India. Between these two, therefore, there is always a conflict, because if you go for higher growth, you may have to lower interest. But if you lower interest, Reserve Bank would feel that that may be inflationary, that may fuel the inflationary process. So to the extent there is a trade-off between growth and inflation, there is bound to be an inherent conflict between the Ministry of Finance and or the finance minister and the governor of Reserve Bank of India. So there is nothing new in that, and this conflict has been there, but the conflict has been there for mainly in the case of conducting monetary policy. That conflict is very common. In fact, when we talk about the central bank independence, my own view is that one has to make a distinction between central bank independence within the government and independence from the government. What is the difference between these two? Independence from the government for the central bank, like Reserve Bank of India, that Reserve Bank would tell the government, you do what you like, but as far as monetary policy is concerned, it is none of your business, and we are going to do what we like, what we think is proper for the country in terms of monetary policy. That would be independence of the central bank from the government. That is not what I have recommended or I would recommend. What we are really talking about is independence of the Reserve Bank of India within government. After all, you have to understand that the Reserve Bank governor is not elected representative of people. He is appointed. On the other hand, Government of India, the Minister of Finance, is appointed, is elected in the popular mandate, and therefore the last word would have to be with the government. That it would be the government of the elected representatives which will prepare the broad macroeconomic framework, and within that broad macroeconomic framework, the autonomy to the Reserve Bank of India would be to the extent of being within the parameters of the overall macroeconomic policy framework. So that would be independence within the government. RBI, to my mind, has always been seeking operational independence from within the government, not from the government. And autonomy is something which is taken, which is not given. And RBI has been often taking it. Sometimes it has not been taking. That depends on the style, the character of strength of the governor. We have had, I'm still saying we have had, actually the Reserve Bank has had many governors who refused to budge by what the finance minister was saying. They held their head high. On the other hand, and I can name them, but it's not in a good taste to name some of them. On the other hand, RBI has also had governors who were told to bend and they chose to crawl. So we have had all kinds of situations that have taken place, and it is a very interesting study. Coming to the present crisis, the present scam, Nirav Modi scam. Let us try to understand what is this scam about. I want to give my perspective on my understanding of the scam, and how did it happen? How did Nirav Modi manage to siphon off such a large amount of money without being noticed by the supervisors and the Reserve Bank of India and government and so on? Even the bank board, we do not know about that. This is my own perspective, and I'm not the ultimate authority, nor do I have any special knowledge. But I have put it together, the modus operandi, which runs as follows. Every bank has something called core banking solution. Core banking solution is the basic thing where for any bank, all the inflows and outflows are monitored under the core banking solution. In addition to that, there is something called SWIFT. SWIFT is an acronym, the short form for Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. I'll repeat. SWIFT means Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. SWIFT was used by the unscrupulous elements in the bank concerned, the Punjab and National Bank, apparently, to do this, to carry out this scam. How did it happen? First of all banks were supposed to connect their SWIFT with their own core banking solution. So all the financial transactions which are taking place through the medium of SWIFT would be captured in this core banking solution, and that it would be monitored at various levels. It would be seen by the auditors, it would be seen by the central bank authorities supervising the banks. So it would be available in a transparent manner, but that was expected. What happened here, or what apparently seems to have happened here, is that while the Punjab National Bank apparently had given in writing to the Reserve Bank of India that they have tied up, they have connected the SWIFT with the core banking solution, in reality, they did not. Now, with whose consent that happened, we do not know as yet. The investigation will show that. But what they would do, the unscrupulous elements, some of whom are already behind the bar, what they would do is that they would come to the bank before the office hours and send a message through SWIFT to an Indian bank abroad. Let's not name the bank, but a bank X abroad, and they would send a message that we have sanctioned, for example, $500 million loan to Nirav Modi's company. And that is the letter of understanding. And that message would be sent to them on SWIFT to a bank located abroad, Indian bank located abroad. That bank in turn would release that $500 million loan to Nirav Modi and his gang, because they have assurance, they have a letter of understanding. Because if they are giving export credit, they would release that loan to the persons concerned, Nirav Modi and the gang, on the presumption that they have assurance from Punjab National Bank that their money will be returned by the Punjab National Bank, which has given an undertaking to repay. So they would release $500 million. Now, after that loan is released, in due course, its installments would be due, its principal would be due. So what would happen? At that time, when that bank started cribbing, what the unscrupulous elements in the bank, in the PNB would do is to sanction to another bank a bigger loan. Earlier loan was $500 million. Then there would be a $750 million loan to another bank. And importantly, after sending that message, they would delete those messages before anybody comes. And the important thing is, it was not connected with the core banking solution. So nobody else had any idea excepting the banks, Indian banks, which received those messages. So to cover the $500 million loan, they would give another loan of $750 million through another bank, which will pay back the bank X, the first bank, and also release more money to Nirav Modi. When that loan would start accumulating, and when that bank would start putting pressure, they would sanction bigger loan to yet another bank, say $1,000 million loan. So this was the Ponzi game that went on for a long time. To cover initial loan, a bigger loan is given, and to cover that, even bigger loan is given. So as we say in Hindi movies, idhar ka mal udhar. This is exactly what was happening, and this was happening through the SWIFT code. And how did the SWIFT code become available to them? There is a highly protected system, but they had that. Now, I'm not sure, but I'm sure it is possible that it was with the connivance of those who were in the decision-making positions. So this was happening, and this Ponzi game went on, and together it accumulated to more than 12,000 crores, and the numbers are still rising. So numbers are now, somebody has estimated that the numbers could be rising to something like 20,000 crores. So this is what is happening. Now the question is it a fault of RBI? How did RBI did not come to know? How did auditors, internal auditors not point it out? How did external auditors not point it out? How did the board not take any action? Why did the supervisory agency like the Reserve Bank of India not come to know about it and take prompt action? The reason, very simple, is that these unscrupulous elements, the bank management had given in writing apparently to the Reserve Bank that we have connected SWIFT to our core banking solution. Now this needs to be verified. They had assured them that we have connected, whereas as a matter of fact they did not. And what the unscrupulous elements would do is to send those messages and delete them immediately, so nobody came to know within the organization. Now whether this happened with the connivance of top management remains to be seen. That those things will come out of the investigation. But this was the modus operandi, and this modus operandi, again, now this, it would seem that, and as it has been said time and again, that Indians, do not, we surpass everybody else in the world as far as bypassing the law is concerned, as far as finding a way around or bending the rules or cornering a solution. But that, be that as it may, let me also say this, that this was not an original idea. This idea of using SWIFT and deleting messages and bringing out this Ponzi game was tried in some East Asian countries. So RBI should have come to know about it, because these exchanges do take place in exchanges of information, but somehow prompt action was not taken. So one doesn't know. The full investigation will show who are the people who are at blame, and what is the solution for that. Now this crisis and the debate, the conflict between RBI and the government of India has raised many questions. many questions, particularly the questions that have been raised is, has the bank nationalization failed? Some people are saying that bank nationalization has failed and we must go ahead and privatize all the banks, as if that is going to be a panacea to all our problems. So these and many other questions arise, and I will answer them as you go on asking questions. So please let me now start taking the questions that have been asked. Rahul Gethe says, "Dear sir, nice to see you. How is your health?" As I said, I'm fine now. I'm completely out of danger and I'm on the path of recovery, and that is why I have started communicating with my friends on Facebook. There is a comment made. Sairam says, "Don't you think that this government is a big failure from the point of view of economy and mitigating social malignancies?" Well, we are not talking here about the performance of this government. The subject today is the banking crisis, and particularly the role played by the Reserve Bank of India and the blame that has been given by Ministry of Finance. That is where I'm trying to give a perspective to people. What you have raised is a broader issue which does not come under the purview of the discussion today. I have Chinmay Kulkarni asking this question: is it possible to find a solution in the near future to rising NPA, the non-performing assets? What all options government and Reserve Bank should consider? Well, actually they know what is the solution. Massive capitalization, bank capitalization is a solution, but immediate solution, and to some extent they have done that in this latest budget. But that can't be the ultimate solution. You cannot go on putting good money chasing the bad money. So the government PSBs, the public sector banks, are owned by the government, and therefore it is their responsibility to recapitalize them. And if the PSBs if there are so many scams in PSBs and money is being diverted, then government can't go on recapitalizing it, because that would open the bank and the government for criticism that they are actually funding people like Vijay Mallya and like Nirav Modi by putting more money into the banking system in the public sector banks. So that option has to be considered very carefully and used very judiciously. The other option that they talk about is bank privatization. Privatization is an option, and there are a lot of people who are saying that the bank nationalization has failed. I do not think that, by the way, Kiran Sonawane says, "Good to hear that your health is good." I'm very touched by so many messages that I have got inquiring about my health. And I must say that I came out of all the trouble that I was in, mainly because of the good wishes of friends like you, and keep showering them and keep them with me. Going back to Chinmay Kulkarni's question, there are a lot of people who are saying now that bank nationalization was a big mistake and it was politically oriented, and it has done more damage than good. And therefore, this is an opportunity that the government should take to privatize all banks. I think this would be a very simplistic, overly simplistic solution. First of all, let me explain what bank nationalization has achieved and what bank nationalization has failed to achieve. The bank nationalization was initially done in 1969, and then the second dose was given in 1980. First, 14 big banks were nationalized, and then 6 more banks were nationalized, and therefore we have 20 nationalized banks other than the State Bank of India. Now, first of all, good thing that happened. Now, let me not go into the politics of why bank nationalization was done. A lot of people focus on that. No, I'm not concerned with that. I'm concerned with the economic reasoning and the effect that bank nationalization had on common masses. most important effect of the positive effect of bank nationalization was this, that from the class banking, India moved to mass banking. So there was a huge change in terms of financial inclusions. When all banks in India were private banks, they were not for masses. They were for very wealthy people, only for classes. One. Second, almost all the private banks, for obvious reasons, they were centered on the metropolitan cities. And there were very few branches of these banks into the rural areas to cater to the needs of the farmers and others. In fact, let me tell you that after nationalization, two things happened. Massive expansion in the rural areas, and it was the RBI which did that to give permission. Those days, branch licensing policy was adopted by the Reserve Bank of India. To open one branch in a metropolitan area, you had to open 2 branches in semi-urban areas and 3 branches in rural areas. So at the time of bank nationalization, what was the proportion of branches in the rural area? It was very, very small. And after bank nationalization, nearly 60% of the branches were opened in the rural area. Of the total number of branches, I still remember those numbers. The total number of branches were 8,262 at the time of bank nationalization, and 15 years after bank nationalization, the number had gone to 65,000. And out of these 65,000 branches, more than 60% branches were in the rural area. So a massive dose of financial inclusion was given. This was a very positive effect. One. Second, what we call as a priority sector lending concept was introduced. And priority sector includes, farmers, agriculture, small businesses, transport operators, and export. Now, these were considered as a priority sector after 1969. So ask yourself a question. What proportion of the loans given by the banks which were nationalized in 1969, before nationalization, what proportion of their loans was going to the priority sectors? Agriculture, small businesses, transport operators, export, and so on. It was less than 14%. So 86% of the loans prior to nationalization were given to the non-priority sectors, meaning the big businesses. This was the situation. And after nationalization, 15 years after nationalization, that was actually reversed, and the priority sector lending was introduced. So 40% of the net bank credit was to be given to the priority sectors, and that made a lot of difference. People who were earlier not getting any institutional credit, and people like farmers who had to take recourse to money lenders who were charging usurious rate of interest, instead of them, they started getting institutional loans at fairly reasonable rates, unlike the money that they were borrowing from the money lenders. So that was again a very big difference that they made. Does that mean that everything was hunky-dory with that? No, not at all. What happened was, with the huge expansion that took place from 8,000 branches to 65,000 branches of all banks, the lines of control between the management and grassroots level branches, it got increasingly weaker. And that is why, what was needed was consolidation, and that was adopted. The health code was adopted by Mr. R.N. Malhotra when he took over as the governor of Reserve Bank of India. So he stopped expansion for a little while and focused on consolidation. And then many years later, when in 1993, as a part of the financial sector reforms, private sector banks were revived and private sector banks also came into being. And this has been part of the expansion of the banking system. Coming now to the question, the bad thing that happened because of nationalization was that there was willy-nilly, irrespective of what party government was in power, there was a tendency for the government to misuse the power and authority that they had over the public sector banks. And there were various ways in which PSBs were exploited. One doesn't want to go through the name of the parties and how did they exploit. But it is generally understood that PSBs were, the public sector banks were exploited by politicians of all parties, and there's no exception here. So that was the bad part. That was the bad part. But does that mean privatization of banks is a solution? Absolutely not. Privatization will have certain benefits in terms of autonomy for the banks to function. But at the same time, if somebody says that there are no crises or no scams taking place in the private sector banks, we would be fooling ourselves. And we have seen two of the biggest private sector banks right now are going through a major problem in terms of giving bad loans. Their NPAs are also on the rise, and mini scams apparently seem to have taken place there. It's only now that it's coming out. So, let's not think in simplistic terms between bank nationalization and or denationalization and encouraging private sector banks. The issue is not so simple, and that is my long answer to your question. Swapnil Suresh Wagmare. No, there is another question. Yogesh Pradhan. Do you think that political involvement is more in banking decisions than RBI? Sorry, I'll repeat the question. Do you think that political involvement is more in banking decisions than RBI? This is where this is really the root cause or source of the problem and the recent debate. When the finance minister blamed the Nirav Modi crisis scam on the supervisory failure of the Reserve Bank of India, that is when Dr. Urjit Patel, Governor of RBI, said that government has taken away all our powers as far as the PSBs are concerned, public sector banks are concerned. So there is a reason to believe that government intervention has been much stronger. The degree of maneuverability that the government Ministry of Finance had. After all, why do they have a banking division? Banking division of the Ministry of Finance does exactly that. So what they are doing is that they have a lot more degree of maneuverability in the day-to-day management of the PSBs than RBI. RBI as the central regulator can issue instructions, but there are overt and covert pressures coming from the government, irrespective of which party has been in power. So this is a question that that we have to address, and this is what drives some people in the direction of denationalization. But as I said, that would be a simplistic kind of solutions. Okay, there is a question by Swapnil, Milind Diksha Vikas Kamble. Our money, the question reads as follows. Our money, oh, I don't know where it is gone. Our money, oh yes, our money gone outside our country already, sir. What is the government doing on that? They are doing nothing. There are all kinds of problems about getting the money back, but you are absolutely right that there is a very strong feeling among the people that very large amount of money has gone out, may it be Mallya, may it be Nirav Modi, and these people are there abroad, and those who sanctioned those, take the case of Vijay Mallya. Vijay Mallya was sanctioned a very large amount of money against, what called collateral. His brand was a collateral. Can you imagine that? And this was not done by PSBs alone, it was done by private banks as well. And these people, there are all kinds of legal problems in getting them back, and some of them are getting married. Vijay Mallya had the third marriage recently, or is going to have third marriage. They are having a good time, and they are laughing at the Indian banking system and laughing at the Indian judicial system. It is a matter of shame that we are not able to get either the money back or culprits back to our own country. Dr. Pradeep Shalini is asking, sir, what is your perspective on Raghuram Rajan's allegations on RBI recently? Let me be very frank. Unlike most people, I am not a big fan of Raghuram Rajan. I know him very well. Personally also, I know him very well. So he's a great economist, one of the finest financial economists that we have had, the world has had, and there's no doubt about it. But my growl against him is this, that he was told by the Ministry of Finance that, boss, you are not going to get next term. He wanted the second term, but he was told that you are not going to get a next term, and on this particular day, your term is going to get over. He should have just kept quiet and gracefully left. Did he do that? No. What he did was, well before that day, Raghuram Rajan issued a letter to all his colleagues about his going back. And what was the timing that was chosen? It was at the time of the height of uncertainty of the Brexit kind. So it is as if, it is as if that his going would have caused a lot of damage. It would have. Fortunately, we have very competent people at the helm of the Reserve Bank of India, and they could avoid that. But the timing that he chose of writing that letter raises many questions about him. And therefore, I am not a great fan of Raghuram Rajan, as most people are. Ajinkya Swapnil Suresh Wagmare, do you give thumbs up to government for bringing in more effective insolvency and bankruptcy code, and more importantly, putting it into action? Yes, Swapnil, I certainly give thumbs up to the government for bringing in effective insolvency and bankruptcy code. I was there in the parliament when that was approved. But let me also say that this should have happened long time ago. Some people feel as if you are bolting the gate after the cattle has left. And we know some people have left, but this should have happened. But at the same time, let me also say that it's better late than never. Ajinkya Gopal Ghare is asking, is there any chance in future privatization of the PSU banks except SBI? As our Niti Aayog chairman has said, I'm not a spokesperson for Niti Aayog vice chairman, or for that matter for anybody, but there would be a debate about privatization. There are problems with nationalization, as I mentioned at length, but privatization is not an obvious solution. Privatization can create its own set of problems. So we have to think through this very thoroughly before we arrive at a decision. Mihir Bhoyer is asking, will naming and shaming the defaulters really help? I believe those who are defaulters and willful defaulters are totally different. Yes, what you say, there is a point that there is something like defaulters. One has to make a distinction between genuine defaulters and willful defaulters. And therefore, naming and shaming, I think there should not be any harm in naming and shaming, even if you are not a willful defaulter. Willful defaulters, of course, they have to be named and shamed. The delicate question is that those who are genuine defaulters, who have defaulted for no fault of theirs, but because of the circumstances, whether they should be named and shamed, that is a delicate question on which view can be taken either way. But my personal view is that whether they are genuine defaulter or whether they are willful defaulters, this is public money that we are talking about. So anybody defaulting must be named and shamed. That's my personal perception. Dr. Pradeep Shalini, thanks for the answer. She says, Bhavya Shah, exactly, better late than never. So it's a comment on my answer, and I appreciate that. Swati Sonawani, is really money secure in our banking system of normal citizens? And how to trust the various facilities which are offered by banks? This is a very, very good question, Swati. And this is a question which is in the minds of very large number of small people, fixed income earners and pensioners and small guys, middle class, lower middle class people and so on. I can assure you that my own perception is that by and large, the scams get highlighted in big way. I'm not saying that they are all cents in the bank. There are scams have taken place, and in every country scams do take place. Japan, in fact, is number one in terms of the frequency of scams, but that is no comfort to us. What I'm saying is that there is a kind of chor sipahi game that goes on. Typically, thieves are always one step ahead of the police. So defaulters are always few feet ahead of the regulators or supervisors. I think we have to make our system more, prompt corrective action that RBI has proposed and should be implemented far more rigorously than what it is being done now. I can assure you that in spite of the scams that we have talked about today, overall banking system in India is extraordinarily stable. People's money is safe. Some unscrupulous elements in some banks have done wrong things and hurt the depositors of that bank. But please do not lose faith in our banking system. It is generally very strong, sound banking system, notwithstanding the scams which have taken place. So don't lose your faith. There is Vijay Swapnil Suresh Wagmare says, thanks for the answer. That's fine. Thank you very much. Vijay Rawat, he says, 10 years back, I heard your analysis at Belgaum about India becoming a superpower by 2020. Still, are you hopeful? I'm very glad that you remember my speech 10 years back. Yes, I certainly hope and pray and believe that India will become a superpower. We cannot put a specific time frame for that, but as you are aware, today, Indian economy is the fastest growing country among the large economies. And if we can maintain 8% plus growth rate and move towards possibly double-digit growth rate in the next 3-4 years and maintain that 8% plus growth rate for 20 years, India would be an advanced economy. It would be one of the superpowers. That's what my feeling is. That is very much possible, subject to, of course, taking the right kind of policy decisions at the right time. Abhijit Anand Jadhav is asking, sir, who can bankers approach if they are pressurized to pass loan application by means of threats? Who can bankers approach if they are pressurized to pass bank application, loan application by means of threat? Is there a specialized defense mechanism for that? No, your own top, if you are a banker, it seems, your top management is the only source that you can go to. If there is a pressure on giving loans, I think you should immediately point out to your immediate supervisor, and he or she will take it up with the top management. But do not go in and give loans under the pretext that somebody was putting pressure. Pressures can be will always be there, but you can stand up and do what you think is right in terms of the financial terms. Shekhar Kulkarni is saying, is today's discussion focused only on the banking sector? Yes, we are focused on conflict between the Ministry of Finance and the Reserve Bank of India in the context of the banking scams. That is the subject for today. Swapnil Gaikwad is asking, sir, how RBI is taking precautions to avoid political interference? Well, there's no precaution to be taken. Remember that governor is appointed by the government of India. Many people do not know that governor and deputy governors are not the employees of the Reserve Bank of India. They are employees of the government of India. And it is the government which has the authority and right to remove them at their pleasure. So avoiding political interference, it depends on the style of the governor. As I mentioned earlier, I don't know whether you were on at the time, RBI has had governors who stood up to all kinds of political pressures. In fact, RBI had one governor who threw his resignation letter on the face of the finance minister in the 50s. So that is one extreme. At the same time, RBI has also had the other extreme where governors were told to bend and they chose to crawl. So it depends on the strength of character of the government. Swapnil Gaikwad, I have answered your question. Rahul Prabhu, sir, I want to know about your work in Rajya Sabha as a member. Please visit my Facebook. On my Facebook, every intervention that I have made in Rajya Sabha is documented there, and you can see the videos. You can also see the videos on YouTube. Everything that I have done in Rajya Sabha so far has been properly documented in the Facebook and on YouTube. So I encourage you and your friends to visit that and find out more about that. Chinmay Kulkarni, India has very high interest rates. Is it very difficult to reach double-digit growth rate with so high interest rate? Interest rates have to be linked with there is a difference between nominal interest rate and the real interest rates. By real interest rate, what I mean is nominal interest rates minus the inflation rate, because inflation rate cuts into the interest rates, right? So if you are, for example, if you are getting 10% interest and the inflation rate in the country is 12%, so you are getting 10% more on your deposit, but value of that is losing. You are losing the value of that by 12%. So you are a net loser by 2 percentage points. That is why what matters is the real interest rate. So if you look at the interest rate and subtract from the nominal interest rate the existing inflation rate, that is the correct number. There we are not exceptionally high. That's what I'm trying to tell you. With the interest rates, with the inflation rate coming down, the interest rates have also come down. So the real interest rate is not very high. But you are right that if we really want to have double-digit economic growth, we will have to contain our inflation and accordingly keep our real interest rate low to spur the private investment in the economy. Mohite is asking, the real money, I can't read that, public real money, banks money use smart businessman. No. Ajinkya, do you think there are some members of finance? Ajinkya Gopal Ghare is asking, sir, do you think there are some members of finance ministry in monetary policy committee? This has happened according to Urjit Patel committee. Do you think the intervention of the government in monetary policy is good or bad for banking system? No, earlier it was the governor who was singularly taking the decisions about the monetary policy. of course, with the help of all the advisors, deputy governors, and so on, and I was one of them. However, now there is the committee. That committee has some government nominees as well. And what finally had happened is that the committee is not exactly the same as what was recommended by Urjit Patel committee when Urjit Patel was deputy governor. However, there is a proper balance between RBI people, government people, and private sector people. It's a combination of those, and that is perfectly all right, because in a democratic system, for all advanced economies, monetary policy committee plays a very important role. And interestingly and importantly, please note that after X number of days, the position taken by each member of the monetary policy committee is made public by law. And therefore, you can actually see, not immediately on the day of monetary policy, but X number of days afterwards, you can go on RBI's website and you will find in the last meeting of monetary policy committee, which member of the monetary policy committee said what and what position he or she has taken. So there is a complete transparency about it, and I think that is the way to go in a democratic setup like ours. स्वाती सोनावणे, निश्चितच बँकेबद्दल विश्वसनीयता असणं महत्वाचं आहे. आपण समर्पकपणे मांडलं त्याबद्दल धन्यवाद. आपण ते अप्रिशिएट केलं त्याबद्दल तुमचे धन्यवाद. Avani Kaushal has asked question. Public sector banks don't have incentives for performance or survival on their own. How do you think this can be tackled? They don't have incentives for performance or survival. Well, of course, survival they have. They don't need incentive to survive because their existence is guaranteed by the government. They are owned by the government. But there is some sense in what you are saying that they don't have incentives for performance. In a more competitive environment, there would be a bigger incentive for them to perform. But remember, earlier, before 1993, when private sector banks were not allowed to come in, they had no competition. They had no competition, and therefore there was no incentive whatsoever for them to perform. After the entry of the private sector banks, one of the best things that has happened is that the banking system has become competitive. It has become competitive because they know that private banks will eat them up if they don't perform. So that has given a lot of incentive. And if you compare the performance of public sector banks and the private sector banks, after the entry of the private sector banks, the performance of public sector banks generally has grossly improved. That is because of the enhanced competition, and that competition gives the incentive that you are talking about. Vinod Maruti Ahire, dear sir, nice to see you. How is your health? My health is fine, as you can see, and I'm back in action. That is why I started this blog again. But thank you for inquiring. It's people like you and your best wishes that gives me a lot of strength to go ahead. Soumya Singla is asking a question. Sir, has the Monetary Policy Committee made the coordination between RBI and government any better? Earlier, governor typically would go, before monetary policy announcement, he would typically go to Delhi, meet the finance minister, sometimes meet the prime minister as well, and seek their views without necessarily making them binding. Now that doesn't happen anymore, but government's representatives are there in the Monetary Policy Committee. So typically, as before the bi-monthly monetary policy is announced, Arvind Subramaniam as the chief economic advisor, or Panagaria as the Niti chief, or sometimes finance minister also, then they would, I'm talking about the past, they would make a statement how lowering the interest rate is good and how economy is poised to take a leap forward if only interest rates are lowered. So as I was telling you earlier, economic growth is their dharma, whereas keeping the inflation at the lowest level, at the optimal level, is the dharma of the Reserve Bank of India. So those statements were there earlier, but now, even now, similar statements are made. That is, in a democratic system, their way of putting some kind of pressure publicly, gently, but they keep saying that RBI is independent, but we think that time has come to lower interest rate. So it comes down to the same thing, and their arguments can be forcefully put across by the members representing the government in the Monetary Policy Committee. So coordination has certainly improved, but the differences are also now transparently clear, and this is very important for a democratic setup like India. Ajinkya Gopal Khare, thank you very much. I appreciate the answer. Okay, I appreciate your appreciation. Jay Moite is asking, sir, what should do government about all type of scam like Malya and Modi? Any suggestions to Bank Committee or RBI? Very difficult to answer. I can assure you, no banking system or no system can be foolproof that no scam will ever take place. No country has been able to develop a system. But what we have to do is this, that there should be prompt corrective action. There should be a very careful supervision, and prompt action must be taken. And whenever any scam takes place, the culprits should not be allowed to run away abroad and take refuge there. That has a very sad effect on the mindset of people. But they should be detained, it should be processed. Our judiciary also need to take quick action on that. So what we can do is to minimize the possibility of scam by all these actions. But it would be little naive to believe that we can make our system, or any country can make their banking system completely foolproof. That no scam will ever take place. No, that kind of assurance nobody can possibly give. Yeah. I think our time is almost up. Is there any other question? My colleague has a question, or I have answered those questions. So this was meant to be about 1 hour, and that is what we have, about 57 minutes into this program. So let me thank all of you for joining me today in this discussion of a very important subject. I also thank all of you for having asked very, very good questions, and I have tried to do my best to answer them. But if I have failed to answer those questions, never mind, because keep asking questions. It's only when you keep asking questions that you will find answers. With this, I'll close the discussion. But before that, let me make an announcement that on 14th April, in the next week, I'm going to go back on the vblog, and the subject at that time would be the Scheduled Caste Prevention of Atrocities Act, and the judgment that has been given by the High Court and the havoc that it has created. I'm going to talk about the Supreme Court judgment and that hot subject. I'm not a legal mind, but I want to talk about that issue on 14th April. That happens to be the Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's birth anniversary. So maybe around the same time, 12 o'clock, if that suits you. And please do join next time when I'm on vblog. And please tell your friends to join, those who are interested in the subject that is being discussed. Once again, thank you all. Thank you very much.